Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Glad to have you here. Good to sing together. We're continuing. Last week we started a series called Manifesto, where we are looking at Jesus' most famous collection of teachings captured in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, 6, and 7. And quick recap for those of you who weren't here. So last week we looked at the section of Scripture known as the Beatitudes. For many of us who've been around the church for a while, it's a very well-known, familiar collections of teachings and sayings that probably deeply resonate with us. Maybe for others who are in the room, it was the first time you've ever walked through them. One of the key things we talked about last week is the idea that as Jesus is presenting, what does it mean to be the people of God? If you want to describe what it means to be the kingdom people, to hold a kingdom ethic, to live your life in a way that aligns with the kingdom of Jesus, he presents this list of people that would be considered blessed, those people who would be under the favor of God. And the list he rolls out would have been shocking to the crowd gathered around him. Because the list Jesus presents as those who are blessed would have been completely opposite to what most people would have thought. In a time and culture that would value certain things, Jesus rolls out this idea that actually to live in rhythm and under the favor of God, these are the characteristics, these are the kinds of people. So just as a way of reminding you or maybe making sure you're up to speed here, here's kind of the contrast of the list when Jesus flips it around on them. So in a time and culture, and while this may have been like 2,000 years ago, I think we could probably safely assume most of these cross over for us here today as well. So in a culture and a time where blessed people would be considered to be those who are wealthy and prosperous, those who are happy, carefree, the powerful, the influential, those who demonstrate outward righteousness, those who are esteemed, the strict and ritualistically pure, all those who when you look at, you're like, they have their stuff together. Those are the people that God is blessing. Those of high status, religious standing, the assertive or the conquerors, those who have power and dominance, who take what they want, seize the moments, those honored and admired by society. So the list that people would have anticipated is probably something like that. And Jesus flips it, and he's like, no, let's talk about the kingdom ethic. And he says this: those that God blesses, that God favors on, are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And people would have been scratching their heads. Wait a second, what is happening here? This is a totally different thing. Who is this person? What is happening? And so as we will be over the coming weeks, we'll be taking different chunks and working our way through the Sermon on the Mount and discovering together what it looks like to be the people of God. So if you have your Bible, we're going to pick right up where we left off last week, Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 13. So hopefully you have a copy of the Bible, or use your phone, Google it, flip open an app, whatever you may have, look on with a neighbor. It will also be on the screen, but as we will work our way through the teaching here, it'll be, I think, helpful for you to be able to refer back and forth as we work our way through. Today we're talking about what it means to be salt and light and our relationship with the law, meaning the Old Testament law and standards that the people of Israel adhered to. So let's begin. Let's read this together. We'll take it chunk by chunk. We'll talk about it together. Well, I'll try my best to pull out some things that we can think about and consider. And then I'll have some time for us to kind of toss it over to you. What do you think and what do you wonder about this? There'll be time for you to just have a little bit of a conversation, and hopefully if I can manage our time well, we'll be able to pass a few mics and listen to each other, believing that even as I'm doing my best to try to lead us through some teaching and some learning, that we do believe that God by His Spirit is working here in this community, in this room, and there may be something that stirs in you or resonates with something maybe I say, or just another idea that you want to mention that is really important for us to hear. And so I know some people love to throw up their hand and they're ready to be a volunteer, and some people not so much, but I just want to prep you again, if this is new to you, that we do love to take a few moments at least to listen to each other. And then we'll talk at the end of, well, so what do we do with this? For those of us who would say we're followers of Jesus today, what does this mean for us today? And we'll talk about that at the end. But let's read this together, Matthew chapter 5, beginning at verse 13. Here it is. It says this: "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." Then he goes on, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Okay, let's stop there. So you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. So a number of years ago, like our girls were younger then, and I remember I probably wasn't having my best day, and they made this comment. They're like, "Dad, you're so salty." And I honestly didn't know what that meant. And anyway, it took me a little while to figure out it's like when you're irritable. If you don't know, it's like when you're a little bit grumpy or irritable, or maybe you're kind of short in your patience. Maybe you react harshly. I know for some of you, you're shocked that I may demonstrate those qualities sometimes. Hilda, don't freak out. But sometimes I can be salty, and then this moment they were calling, so I don't know what was going on. But like any dad, any parent, the best thing is when you use their phrase and then you just look for an opportunity to like give it back to them. So it's fun, over the coming days and months where they would be maybe a little grumpy or short in the morning. I'd be like, Tabea, like, why so salty? Or Hadley, like, why so salty? I just asked you to unload the dishwasher. Like, what's going on, And I started thinking about this concept of being salt. When Jesus is saying you're the salt of the earth, what is Jesus talking about? What comes to mind for you? He's talking about being salty, like ornery? No. What is he describing here when he's talking about the people of God? You are the salt of the earth. To all those people gathered around him, he's pointing, he's directing to them, he's giving them this description. You are the salt of the earth. What is he really trying to get at here? So first, I think it's important to understand a little bit about how salt would be viewed in the ancient Middle East in this time. So if you don't know, salt would have been this really, really valuable and esteemed commodity. It's not like what we think of salt now, right? Not a big deal, pass the salt, whatever. This would have been this really valuable commodity. The ancient Greeks actually viewed it as something that was almost divine. Homer would say this is the essence of the divine almost. There's this deep sense of like the value of salt. It was really, really important. I've referred to the book of Sirach before, which is a collection of Jewish teachings and sayings that help people to understand what it means to live in proper standing with God. And in those writings, this Jewish scribe, he describes the value of salt this way. He says, basic to all the necessities of human life are water, okay, that makes sense for us, fire, iron, salt, fine flour, milk, honey, wine, oil, and clothing. It was this deeply cherished and valued commodity. It was so valuable, in fact, that some of the ancient Romans had this practice where they would often pay soldiers with salt. That seems crazy, right? Can you imagine showing up for payday and your boss hands you a bag of salt? But it was so valuable, it was so important that even payday could look like salt because of how they used it. So what's Jesus talking about here? I want to toss out a few ideas that different authors and commentators and scholars have proposed as what Jesus might be referring to when he says, you are the salt of the earth. So here's a number of different ways you can think about it. So when he's talking to his audience, talking about what it means to be a disciple, a follower of Jesus, here's some ideas. Disciples as preservers. I think we have a list here. Here we go. So you can follow along. Preservers. So clearly, in the ancient world where there's no refrigeration, salt would be used to preserve meat and fish so that you could transport it, sell it, to stop it from spoiling, going rotten. So perhaps Jesus is saying, hey, as my followers, you are acting as a preserving agent. You are helping to maintain the quality of what is around you and ward off the rot, ward off those things that would break down that spiritual or moral decay. You're acting as a preservative here. Another one adds flavor. Like salt, as we know, adds flavor to food. It brings out the best flavors. So perhaps Jesus is saying, hey, where you are bringing the flavor, the essence of God and enhancing what is around you. That is part of your role here as a follower of Jesus. You're bringing like the joy and the taste and the flavor of God so that others can experience it. Also, maybe a purifying or healing agent. So in this time and culture, sometimes they would mix salt with either cow's milk or honey and use that as an ointment for infection, as a laxative, to help stimulate childbirth. They would use it in all kinds of different ways. To heal a sore, ever put salt on a canker? So there's this idea that it had a medicinal quality to it. So Jesus is saying, hey, as my followers, as my disciples, as you go out into the world around you, you are acting as medicine to heal that which is broken, that which needs soothing and care. This is something you are to do to exhibit the qualities of the kingdom, the justice, the righteousness of God, and the love of God, and you put it on display and you bring healing through that. Perhaps he was talking about this idea of a commitment. So there are Old Testament sacrificial practices that we read about that required salt to be used as part of the sacrifice. So perhaps Jesus is saying, hey, as my followers, you are, through your very lives, are showing this covenant, commitment, and faithfulness to God, even by the way you live your life. Creating thirst. So we know that salty meal, you're going to be thirsty afterwards. So as my followers, you are going to create this thirst in other people to discover and encounter God wherever you go. I would say this, instead of trying to zone in on one, how about all of them? How about all of them in different ways help us catch this glimpse and this picture of what it means to be the salt of the earth as Jesus is defining it here in his teaching? So how about we say it this way? When Jesus says you are the salt of the earth, he is saying his followers are meant to show up in the world in a way that preserves what's good, adds flavor, brings healing, stirs things up when needed, and ultimately makes a real difference that points people back to God. And then look at the end of verse 13. Hopefully you still have it open. You're the salt of the earth, and says, but if the salt loses its saltiness, what's he talking about here? How can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So again, in this context, there's two main kinds of salt. There was a pure salt that was made from a pure water source, and as the water evaporated, you'd be left with pure salt. And this was the highly valued commodity. But there's also salt that people would get from an impure source, impure salt. And they would get this by boiling off the water, and you'd be left with this white substance that was partially salt, yes, but it was also contained other minerals, including gypsum. So hang on to that for a second. Here's where we're going. So this was the thing that most people would have. So farmers, because of that fertilizing element helping things to grow, farmers would have large piles of this impure salt around their farms. And what they would do is they would use it then, sprinkle bits of it across their fields and their crops in order to act almost like a fertilizer. The problem was, though, is this pile of salt, this impure, not so valuable salt, happened to get wet. The salt component of what was there would leach out and go into the ground and be lost forever. You can't make it salty again. Salt is now no longer present in this pile. What are you left with? This is worthless. Well, what you're left with is this other substance, these other minerals, with a high percentage of gypsum. And what is that gypsum good for? Well, if you mix it with water and you spread it out, it's good for a hardening substance. So here's where Jesus is going with this. If salt loses its saltiness, it cannot be made salty again. It's been washed away. And what you're left with is not worth very much at all. But you know what it's good for? It's good for tossing out on the paths where people want to walk so that they now have a hardened path and they can trample away. That's all it's good for. So sometimes when we read these verses, we're not recognizing that Jesus as this teacher is using things that they readily would have known about, like these settings and cultures and moments and characters and occupations. He's doing all these things because the people know it. So when he's talking about being the salt of the earth, it's cueing for them certain things. When he's talking about once it loses its saltiness, it's not good for anything except to be trampled underfoot. It's because once it's been used up, once the salt is gone, you might as well just use it, the gypsum quality, to make a hard path to walk along. It's not good for anything else. This is what Jesus is helping them understand here. And then he goes on. Verse 14 to 16, he talks about being the light of the world. When I read this section, the light of the world, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden, when I think about all this imagery of light now, as we switch from salt to light, I can't help think about that scene in The Lord of the Rings. I know some of you like to geek out. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings, but I do remember this part. But do you remember at the end, there's going to be this big war and they know they're going to need help. And so Gandalf kind of tells, I think it's Pippin, to go up and sneak up and light the signal fire. And then someone sees that fire being lit, and then the next person lights the fire, and the next person, and it sends this message that help is needed, and then at the end, all is one. But when I think about this idea of a huge city that's up on a hill, you can't hide that, right? The glow of that city, the light of that city, you can't hide that. If you have a light, the last thing you do is put it under a bowl. Why would you do that? Why would you light something and then hide it? Like our role then, when Jesus is rolling this, our role as followers of Jesus here, when he's using this image of light, is not to keep it secret and hidden. It's actually to put it on a stand so that it gives light to those around us. There's a purpose in us shining this light. There's a reason why we shine this light. It's to put on display the one who gives us this source of light. Let me give you another verse. In John chapter 8, Jesus is talking, using this image again of light to help people understand what's going on. And this is what he says in John 8, verse 12. It says, Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. So as we choose to follow Jesus, as we say we are apprentices and disciples of Jesus, we recognize that we carry the light of Jesus in us. And part of our task when Jesus says you're the light of the world, it's to put that on display, to not hide it away, to not be shy, but to announce to people. Because you know the result of that, the result of letting the light shine is that people will see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. It's not so people are attracted to us. It's simply so that others are like, what is happening with that person, that community of people? What is animating them, giving them their fire and their purpose and their mission? And they recognize the source is God. It's not to direct attention to ourselves, but certainly to get people to focus on who God is. Haddon Robertson, in his writing, he says this. He says, Jesus did not call us to be magnificent chandeliers for people to admire. He called us to be a single bulb in the back hall to keep people from breaking their necks when they go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. He called us to make a difference in the darkness. Doing so makes us significant. We find purpose and identity when we put the light of God on display for others, allowing our very lives to be a light. And then as we continue on, let's keep going. Verse 17, let's keep rolling here. Then he transitions again. So we talked about salt, we talked about light, and now he moves on to this idea of the law. And for some people, this would have been a real kind of sticking point here. What is this teacher, this rabbi from Nazareth, what on earth is he saying here? Watch where he goes. He says, verse 17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So at this point, and all throughout Jesus' life and ministry, there were like these swirling theories and assumptions about who he was. This upstart rabbi and teacher, often flipping around the things that they thought were kind of baked in stone. This is who we are, this is who God is, this is how we're supposed to be. Jesus flips them around. And so there were ideas certainly floating around. And one of their concerns is, what is Jesus then thinking and impression about the law and the prophets? So that we understand how important this was to them, this question, this wondering, it's because their scriptures, the law, the Torah, and the writings of the prophet, it was central to their identity and sense of belonging. This was who they were. So if you know the Old Testament story, what we call the Old Testament, their scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, it told the story of how everything got going, how God called all things into existence. It tells the story of the birth of them as a national identity with God's covenant with Abraham and his family. I will make you like the stars in the sky, your descendants. I will make you a great nation, and through you will bless other people. It's telling their unfolding story. It captures the highs and lows as this one family becomes a nation, becomes this whole people group. It tells the ways that they succeed. It tells the ways they fail. It talks about the rise of the monarchy, the failure of the monarchy. It talks about the prophets who come and call people back to God, giving them warnings about the ways they have been unfaithful to God and the covenant that they supposedly had agreed to. It talks about these prophetic pictures of the Messiah to come when God would make everything right. Like this was their identity. This is who they were. And so when someone new shows up, begins with this new teaching, the fear in the back is, how does he view our scriptures? What does he think about our law and our prophets? Is he going to get rid of all this too? Blasphemy. But notice what Jesus says. He knows this will be on their mind. He knows this is like there's rumors and things going on. And so he identifies it. He hits it head on. I haven't come to get rid of the old. I've come to accomplish it. So different translations handle this in different ways. So the NIV, the New International Version, which is what we were reading this morning, says, I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill them. The New Living Translation says, I've not come to abolish, but to accomplish their purpose. Everything that these laws and prophets were talking about and pointing to and anticipating, I'm here to accomplish these. This, I am what you're waiting for. I am here. And then in Eugene Peterson's translation, he says, I am here to complete them, to bring them to fulfillment and completion. So a number of years ago, I don't know if you've ever seen this or done this, but a number of years ago, we were down at Disney as a family, and I think it was toward the end of the day, and we're walking around, and we see this person. Sorry, I keep picking this up because I'm so dry, but hold, please. We see this person sitting there, and they have like the caricature things and all those different things, but we see this person sitting there, and with scissors are like cutting out a silhouette. This isn't one of our kids, but I couldn't find the one of our kids. I know we have it in a box somewhere. But this gives you an example. They're looking at the side profile of the kid sitting there, and with scissors and black paper, they're cutting it out. And what you're left with is a silhouette like this that you can then take home. And it's like, it blew my mind that just with like construction paper and scissors, this person is so creative and artistic that they could capture the essence, kind of the picture of our kids. And so we got all 3 kids done, and we have all their side profiles when they were really little, and it's super cute, super awesome. And if you know our kids or knew them back then, when you looked at the different silhouettes, you're like, okay, that is Tabea, clearly that's Silas, clearly that's Hadley. It would make sense to you. But you didn't actually really see them, right? You saw the side, you got a glimpse of it, this impression of it, but you didn't really understand it. But then if you were to look at the silhouette and then put the real picture, then you're like, oh, I kind of see it here, but this is who they really are. This is what they really look like. And I liken that here to what Jesus is doing. He's like, you've had these impressions of what it meant to relate to God and the law. You've had these standards by which you were ordering your life and your nation in order to be right with God. You've had this sacrificial system to deal with your sin and brokenness. You've had all these mechanisms to try to be in relationship with God, but they're kind of just like this black silhouette. You kind of get the impression, but it's not full. You're not really seeing it in 3D in color. And then you see a full color picture. You meet the real person. You're like, that's who it is. That's kind of what Jesus is doing here. I'm not here to get rid of all these things. These things are important. I'm not here to abolish them or to get rid of them. I'm here to complete them, to fulfill them. Everything you have been waiting for, I'm here to fulfill. Now, an interesting thing that probably really riled them up is when he's inserting himself, I have come to fulfill them. So ancient rabbis and teachers, they didn't often come up with new teachings. Often what they would do is they would look back and they would draw from scripture and other teachings of rabbis from the past, and they would help kind of people understand them perhaps in different ways, but they weren't creating something new. They were just kind of linking ideas together, and that gave them their kind of mantle of teaching. But here Jesus, not in a selfish way, but he's saying, I have come to fulfill them. He is now inserting himself into the middle of this story, saying, everything that you've been thinking about, everything you're worried about, I'm going to fulfill it and complete it. Which for some people would have been so scandalous that it would have made their blood boil. Who does this guy think he is? That he's the one we've been waiting for? This like wandering itinerant teacher? Sleeping in the fields? No home to call his own? How can it be? We also have in that section there, we have this reference to the least, the greatest, and righteousness surpassing that of the Pharisees. I want to start with the Pharisees part. So, again, the Pharisees, for the people in the culture, they were viewed as like the gold standard of like religious life. Now, we know, if you've read other accounts through the Gospels, where Jesus just like obliterates them for their phoniness, for having this outward facade of everything being okay, but inside they're just rotten. But people would look at the Pharisees as the religious establishment and say, like, that's what we're supposed to get to. That was kind of like, that's our picture of what we're pursuing, what we're shooting for. And then Jesus is saying, wait, unless you have righteousness that surpasses that of the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of God. The average listener and person would be like, there is just no way we can do what those Pharisees, like, what do you, that's impossible, isn't it? And that's exactly the point that Jesus is making. Unless your righteousness surpasses that, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And people would have been like, but how are we ever going to do that? And he's basically saying, you're right. Because in this context, surpassing the Pharisees is helping them to understand that in and of yourself, through your own efforts, your own work, your own striving, you cannot achieve righteousness that allows you entrance into the throne room of God. It means that surpassing is linked here to this idea of a transformed heart and life that moves way beyond this system of rules and legalism of what you should and shouldn't do. It's about an inner life that's transformed, that's only possible through the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. For you to do this, it requires you to lay your life down, to come to the end of yourself. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will see God. To allow God to have access. You of your own striving cannot make this happen. Jesus is calling them forward to something different. It's not just about this, and then you're okay. It's like, no, it's going to cost you way more. It's your whole life, and it's experiencing transformation from the inside out. Then I would just in quick here, just this reference to the least and the greatest. So historically, this has been understood. Most kind of scholars would say it's not about who's in and who's out, but it's almost like this continuum of those who take the teachings of Jesus seriously and then those who don't. So this idea that there are going to be times and folks who try to water down or dismiss or let go parts of Jesus' ethic and teaching. It doesn't mean they're not in. It just means Jesus says you're least in the kingdom. You didn't really take it super seriously. But there are others that Jesus calls greatest in the kingdom, are those who are saying, I'm going to listen and pay attention to everything that Jesus lays out here. That's why when we set this up last week, we talked about, Jesus says, if you hear my commands and you put them into practice, you're like a wise man who built his house on solid rock. But if you hear what I have to say and you don't put it into practice, you're like that foolish man, and the winds and the waves will destroy your home. What do you want to do? How do you want to order your life? What ethic do you want to set yourself up around? Jesus is presenting this whole new way of being, and he's saying, this is what it looks like. What do you want to be about? Salt, light, relationship to the law. It's only through me. Okay, we're doing good. I'm going to give you a moment now. So here's what I'd love you to do. I'd love you just to talk about any of those ideas. What sparks your imagination? What grabs your attention? What do you wonder about? What makes you curious? I invite you to chat with someone around you. If you haven't been a part of this before, it's just a free chance for you to chat. You don't have to. I'm not trying to make anyone uncomfortable. We often joke that the sign that you don't want to talk to someone around you is just take out your phone and start doing something on it. You're welcome to grab another cup of coffee or whatever. But I'm just going to give you maybe about 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then we'll pass some mics. I'd love to hear what you're thinking at this part as Jesus is explaining this kingdom ethic. So I'll watch the clock. You don't have to. Ready? Go. Okay, bring you back together here. Anyone who want to jump in? Just throw up your hand. We have a couple mic runners. We'd love to get one over to you so we can all hear what you're saying. Anyone want to jump in? Don't be shy. Oh, yeah, up here. I feel like, Paul, you're becoming like, if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. Yeah. I'm starting to get to know you that way. Yeah, it's good. You're breaking the ice.
Thank you. Yeah, so for me, a few years ago now, my dad introduced this revolutionary concept to me. I love tomatoes. They're like one of my favorite
Tomatoes?
Fruit. Yeah, tomatoes.
Oh, yeah.
But a few years ago, my dad sliced tomatoes. It's always been a thing, but he put salt on it. And I don't know who else puts salt on their tomatoes. It's the thing I always do now, but it just gave me that new understanding, comprehension of the verse, because it makes it so much better. And so for me, it's always just been been a comparison of just like how much we're supposed to enhance and supposed to improve other people's lives. But yeah, I never really considered the other options of like preserving and restoring and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It changes the flavors, right? So my dad since we're talking about dads and food. Sorry, you can hand the mic back. I'm just going to tell you this. My dad switched from Lay's original chips to like the 50% less salt chips. I said to him, like, what is the point of eating the chips? You know? You're going the wrong way that Jesus is telling us. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Someone else. Love to hear someone else's thoughts or what's sparking. Yeah, please, over here. Morning. It's coming.
Good morning. I don't envy the job of church leaders, especially after reading the quote you did about whether we're a chandelier or a single light bulb. And I think sometimes to be countercultural is really a really bad business choice. And I'm just curious if you could comment on that. Because in order to have us attend here, we have to be a chandelier, but we're challenged to be a light bulb.
So just so I'm understanding, Amy, when you're saying that, can you just help me understand what you're saying? When you're saying we have to be a chandelier?
Yeah, to attract people to us.
Oh, I see what you're saying, right.
I'm curious how to deal with that constant tension between being a light bulb and a chandelier.
Yeah, that's great. So here's off the top of my head a few things. So when Jesus says, I'm the light, and that our task then is to let the light of Jesus shine through us, whenever we have people together and we're letting the light of Jesus shine, there is going to be an element that people will see it and notice and be attracted to it. I think what we have to always be careful with is what posture does that move us into? Does that move us into this place of being attractional, performative, hey, look at me? Or do we, even just being aware and talking about it, catch ourselves and say, actually, we want to be exactly the same people we always are, whether we're in front of people or not. There is an attractional thing. People should be curious about this Jesus we follow and the way it's changing our lives. But as they come into proximity with us, we should help direct them to Jesus and not have them stop with us. And I think that is a temptation for church leaders, as you articulate, is that it can be easy in the human psyche to think people are showing up because of me. I'm not saying it here, I'm just saying in the larger church. I think particularly as churches continue to get bigger and bigger, I think that temptation is stronger and stronger. And I think we always need to name it and fight against it. So we want to let the light of Jesus shine through us, but we're not the destination. We're pointing to people to where they need to fix their eyes. So that's what I would just say. And live in the tension of that. There is a tension in that. And so we need to do everything we can to try to break that down. Is that fair?
Yeah, thank you.
Someone else. Thanks, Amy. That was awesome. Maybe one more. No one wants to go after that. Oh, yeah, so there's someone at the back.
Hi,
hey, Roman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just to touch on a few other topics. One of them, salt. You mentioned a lot of good things about it, but some of the imagery that came to mind for me as well is that, something can be too salty. And to me, I got less of a light bulb imagery and more of like a flame imagery where it's important to, light up people's world, but you got to do it in a way that is respective to how salty someone may like whatever they're eating or consuming. So I guess, what do you have to say as far as like finding a balance to meet a certain individual of how much salt or light that person is willing to take on or embrace, or however you would put it?
That's a great comment and question. I think we always have to be aware of those that we are spending time with and recognize that as we represent Jesus, the characteristics of Jesus also need to be present in us. So I think we can sometimes be guilty of saying, well, I'm just telling them about Jesus, and we do it in the most corrosive, harmful way that actually hurts people. So how are we then modeling the character of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit, as Galatians talks about, so that as people encounter us, the essence and the flavor is raised, light is illuminated to their path, but we're not like trying to get those 1 million candles spotlights and just blast them in the face. I think that's just an awareness. I think we have to always be conscious and aware of like our situations, our surroundings, the people we're spending time with, and ask God to give us wisdom in the moments. I would say most of us, not all of us, tend to tip and to default in the posture of underrepresenting Jesus for fear that we offend. Some of us may tip on the other side, for sure. But maybe you would agree with me. I think our default is actually to slink back and not to do too much. And sometimes I wonder why that's sometimes me, especially in my role as a pastor. Like, I cringe if someone says, "So what do you do for work?" I feel like, oh, you're never going to talk to me again. I don't know why that's built into me. It's like this weird thing. But anyways, I do think, yes, like too much salt can be corrosive on a car, hurt things. But in the way Jesus is talking about, we're supposed to be bringing and enhancing and healing. We're supposed to be part of what our world is longing for. We should be representing, because once they meet Jesus, they discover that as salt and light. And if we're doing something in a way that is blowing things up and wrecking our witness for Jesus, we should probably examine our methods, our motives. That's great. We can talk more about that. Okay, let's end with this. Back when I was in seminary, I had this one professor, and I don't know, he was awesome, but sometimes he would go off on tangents and just start riffing on things. Mark, I'm not saying you do that in your lectures, but this guy would often do those things, and he would just go down these tangents. And I remember one time, and it always stuck with me. I've always remembered. He said something. This isn't a direct quote, but it's something like this. He said, "School is one of the only places where we are happy to take less than what we pay for." School is one of the only places where we, and he was actually saying you to our class, where you are happy to take less than what you pay for. And what he meant by that is like students are always looking for shortcuts. If classes are canceled, it's like, yes. If things are busy, or it's like, hey, that should have been a 30-page paper. I know it's been a busy season. It's going to be 20. We're like, thank goodness. Like, we're always looking for ways, partly because we're just like trying to get through it. The material's a lot. But his comment back then, and still in this moment as I was working through this teaching, I'm like, there are some things that we're okay with leaving money on the table, getting less than maybe what we could. And I think sometimes our apprenticeship to Jesus is one of those areas where we're at times okay with cheating our formation and our transformation, because it's just some ways easier to not push through. Are we leaving money on the table? I think sometimes, I just jotted down some different ways that may show up. Sometimes I think we compromise our convictions. So in order to avoid conflict or direct conversations, risk or potential criticisms, we just don't say anything at all. It's not even the way we say it with gentleness and humility and love. We just don't even say it. And so we just go along in order to blend in. So we kind of just are okay with leaving it out there. Sometimes I think we're okay with keeping our faith private. This idea of like letting your light shine, this is like, ooh, I'm not sure. Feels so much better to like, that even like the light of Jesus won't even peek out. Because if it does, what are people going to say? What are they going to ask? Now they might have all these questions, or they'll recognize that we don't have it all together. So we'd rather just keep it private and personal and to ourselves. Or maybe we actually fail to live in any way that differentiates us from our culture. Our lives are indistinguishable from those around us. Sure, we may say we follow Jesus and we are committed to Jesus and we want our life to align with the ethic and teachings of Jesus. But beyond the words, there's no distinguishing markers on our life from those around us as followers of Jesus. It can show up in the way we use our speech, the way we joke, the choices we make, the way we spend our money, the things we prioritize, how we treat people, family members, coworkers, neighbors. The characteristics of Jesus are not evident in our life. And so we fail to live differently. So the question then is, are there any ways that we, or any ways that you, are toning down your saltiness and your light? Can you think of an instance, a circumstance, a situation where you are maybe not always fully being aware, but in this moment, maybe now more aware that like I am choosing to not be salty in the Jesus way, to not let my light shine. I'm choosing to just kind of take less than what Jesus has for me. I'm choosing to compromise my transformation. Bonhoeffer, who I just love Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he says this about the visible community. He says, followers are the visible community of faith. The visible community of faith. Their discipleship is a visible act which separates them from the world. Or it is not discipleship. Is that too harsh? It's a visible act, or it's not discipleship, he says. And discipleship is as visible as light in the night, as a mountain on flat land. Then he continues, he says, to flee into invisibility is to deny the call. Any community of Jesus which wants to be invisible is no longer a community that follows him. So whenever we are tempted to tone down the saltiness, to hide our light, to keep it to ourselves, I just want to remind you and encourage you that Jesus has not created you to be that way. As he has invited you to join him in his kingdom mission, he's not inviting you to be less than your full self in your apprenticeship with Jesus. It's not about being private or reducing or hiding. It's about finding the right ways to represent Jesus properly. So I'd love to pray this benediction over you, over myself as a challenge for us, if that's okay as we wrap up, and then we're going to sing. So if you're willing and able, would you stand as I read this benediction over you as a way of just sitting with this idea and committing it to the Lord? So friends, as we're wrapping up our time together and as you head out into the week ahead, a few thoughts. May you remember that you really can make a difference right where you are. In your homes, your workplaces, your schools, and your neighborhoods, you are there for a reason. In your homes, may you be agents of patience, forgiveness, and encouragement, setting the tone of love and grace. In your places of work, may you bring honesty and fairness, being people of integrity even when no one is watching. Among your friends, may your words and actions reflect the hope and compassion of Christ, unafraid to let his light shine through you. In your neighborhoods, may you be quick to lend a hand and build true community, letting small acts of kindness point others to the goodness of God. Let his light shine through you. And when you walk into a room, may people feel a little more seen and a little more loved simply because you are there as a follower of Jesus. Even the small things, a kind word, a forgiving attitude, a moment of patience, can push back the darkness and let God's light shine through. And as you go from here into your normal, everyday routines, remember that it all matters. The little choices, the quiet ways you serve, the love you show, they all have impact. People notice, and God uses it. So friends, I pray this over you. Will you go now into your week ahead, ready to add flavor, to shine goodness, and trust God to work through it all? You are sent out, you are blessed, and you are empowered to be the salt and the light wherever you are. Stay salty, my friends. Amen.